This is the North Star Sports Show with ET&B.
Welcome into another episode of the North Star Sports Show with ET&B. Of course, I am the ET part of this podcast.
And I'm the Brandon part of this podcast, the big old B.
The big old B. Well, we're here. We're going to do one on high school sports this time. Just Minnesota. We don't have the time nor, I think, energy to do one for the entire 50 United States. So we're just going to work with our hometown state, which is Minnesota. Again, that's a lot to do. That's 50 states worth.
I mean, I look at the teams in Minnesota alone, but that's a day worth of looking at stats and records. And no, thank you for the rest of the states. That's so much.
And you got to think, like the bigger states like Texas, California, and all those states, they're going to be just even more time consuming. And yeah, Minnesota was enough. It's been a day and a half of research that we've done, and we're finally done. We finally got our stats right here. Yes, so professional. It's on yellow paper, and we're going to be looking up and down at it. So professional, the most professional right here on the North Star Sports Show with ET&B. But anyways, we do what we can. But here, again, on this episode, we're going to be talking about some high school basketball and some hockey and some wrestling. We'll probably split it up into a couple parts, part 1, 2, 3 maybe. We'll see how long each one goes. We tend to go really long.
We do. We tend to go a bit longer than we normally do because we run on about a lot of things, way off tangent and everything. But I think we might break it up, like you said, a little bit, just in case. And if people are just looking for a specific sport, they don't have to wait through half an hour of basketball to get to the hockey or vice versa.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what we'll do here is we'll start with the boys, and then after we're done with the boys, we'll go to the girls' side of things. So right now we're just going to go by class, how it goes in Minnesota. Each schools, are put into a class based on size. So it's the really small schools in Class A. In Class AA, it's bigger schools. If any of you know size of like Mora or Pine City, those are, or Annandale, Caledonia, those are kind of the 2A schools. And then in 3A, it's more of your Herman Towns, your North Branches, Forest Lakes, those kind of schools. And then your 4A schools are the biggest schools, the Edinas, Eden Prairies, Minneapolis North, the big schools, the ones kind of everyone knows about, even if you're not from Minnesota. So we'll just talk about the Class A boys basketball right now. Number one, we're just going to do top 5 because, again, there are, what was it, like 300-400 schools to go through in just basketball alone for boys?
Yeah, there is a ton of them, a metric ton of them, and the top 5 is the only timely manner you can get anything out with. Otherwise, you'd be scrolling for days just to get enough info to fill one page of paper, and you're at like the top 20, 30.
Right, exactly. I mean, we got 2 pages for boys and girls basketball, and that's only top 5 for each class. So if we were to do all 300-400 schools, we'd have to split each one up into, 3 different sections just for one, gender. But we'll start with the boys. And again, at number 1 in Class Single A is Mayor Lutheran. They're sitting at 8-1 right now, scoring about 73 points per game, allowing about 53 points per game. And we kind of talked about it before, earlier on in the season. It was like, it's a little too early because some of these scores are going to drastically change come, midway through the season. Of course, this year's a little bit different with COVID. The seasons are down to about 73%. So this year they have about 18-19 regular season games. Normally it's about 25-26. So it makes a difference, and it makes the season a lot shorter. It makes games count that much more each time you're playing them. But again, 73 points per game, 53 points against, 8-1, not a bad record, and they're at number 1 for no reason, or for a reason. And they are a pretty good team. When you have a 20-point scoring differential, you're good.
Yeah, and if you can, like you said, have a decent scoring differential and you got more points and you're defending more points, it's kind of the booger effect. Well, you're scoring more points, you're going to win the game here. But no, we're about 10-ish games in, and you get the averages going, and at about 10 games you get a pretty decent average of how the team's doing. They've had the chance to play some good teams. They've played some not as good teams, and the average gets a little bit more true than when we looked at it like in the beginning of the season with like 3-4 games. And there was one hockey team that was scoring 15 points a game because of that.
Yeah, it was ridiculous, but now we've checked again, and it's like, oh, it's calmed way down. It's gotten to a more reasonable, even though I think they're still scoring like 8 points per game or something. But again, like you mentioned, the scores are becoming a lot more true. They're getting into their schedule. They're facing those tough teams. There are a couple teams on this list that really their schedule doesn't have a lot of tough teams. It's maybe one, if any. And it's like, oh, they're undefeated. They're scoring 90 points per game. Well, they haven't really played anyone that competitive yet. So with some of these schools, it kind of remains to be seen. So take it with a little grain of salt. But Mayor Lutheran, they are a very good team. Second on that list, they are undefeated. It is Manaman Waban. They are 9-0, and they are scoring the highest amount in the top 5 of Class A with 82.5 points per game and only allowing 50 points per game. That's a pretty good margin.
Yeah, I mean, 10 more points than the other number 1 team, and just about the same defense. They're averaging about 50 points, allowing it. But the offense come to play. Maybe they're shooting a few more threes. Maybe they're a little bit better in the paint. But in basketball, 10 points, I mean, it's a big deal, but not as big as a deal as hockey or like football, where points are a bit harder to come by. That's about, 3 threes, and they're about made up. But it's still a great average, and there's a reason they're second for that average.
Right, exactly. And, looking at that, I've been able to, be blessed where I work with being able to go and call games. And being able to watch basketball, it's like, oh, they're such a good team, and then they face a really good team, and it's like, oh, wow, you really start to see what they need to work on. And it's not that they're a bad team. It's just like, oh, okay, their flaws kind of come out a little bit more, and you start to see, oh, okay, this is kind of what they need to work on just a little bit. Again, not that they're a bad team, but you can see where the areas of improvement are. And, again, sometimes it's just as simple as rebounding or, shooting that one more 3-point per game, and it makes all the difference in the world. And we'll get into more of that later on, because we'll talk about kind of the area of schools that we were from and some of the schools that we played as well. Then moving on to number 3, this school I actually haven't ever heard of, to be totally honest, in Minnesota. It's New York Mills. At 7-2, they score about 71.5 points per game, give up about 56 points per game. I've never heard of that school, and it's probably my bad, but they've probably been pretty good in basketball, I'm guessing.
You're not alone. I have not heard of them. Although, I mean, half the schools in Minnesota I cannot pronounce. Thank God I went to a school that I could pronounce. But, I've never heard of them. But again, you got a decent average. They're a little bit on the lower side, a little bit smaller average there. But it seems like they're doing pretty good. What's the record?
7-2. So, that average, can dip or really fly up when you have a good or bad game. Our hometown team, we'll get into that in a little bit. Their average dipped because of just one game drastically. So, it just all depends. A team could be scoring 90 points a game and lose a game, 45-43, and that shoots their average down. So, again, a lot of this is kind of take it with a tiny bit of grain of salt. But like we mentioned before, these averages are getting to be a lot more true now that we're about halfway through the season. In fourth is Mankato Loyola. They have about, 7 different Mankato teams along with Rochester. It is insane, but Mankato Loyola is 8-1 right now, scoring 66 points per game and allowing only 49. So that's one of the teams where you see the points per game kind of dip, but also the defense is not necessarily better, but they're allowing less per game.
Yeah, it's just you just moving the slider down a little bit. Instead of scoring higher and letting more points, you're just dropping it down a little bit. Maybe a little bit tougher defense at the 3-point. Maybe they're not as proficient in the 3-points. They're taking more in the paint shots. Kind of, like I said, the averages may move around, but it's all about that same differential.
Exactly, and a lot of things that can happen too is turnovers. Those are a big part of the game, especially in basketball. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a basketball game in history where there hasn't been a turnover. But I mean, you do get the games where it's turnover ridden, and it's like, oh my goodness, they go 5 minutes without either team scoring, and it's like that can really make a difference because 5 minutes without scoring is a long time, and you do that, and then you're going to get around those 60 points per game. But you do have teams who can score 90 points per game, and it doesn't matter how much time they have left. So, then in fifth, it is Renville County West at 8-0. They're averaging 68 points per game and giving up 55 points per game. That one's a little bit closer, but they're undefeated for a reason. When it's a score like that, I always tend to think, oh, it's a lot closer games. It's coming down to the wire. It's coming down to the last 3 minutes, and they're winning the game. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes maybe they're just kind of sitting on a lead,
which happens a lot. I mean, I remember there was a school when we were in high school that they got in trouble because they put up, I think it was like they got one basket, and they just held on to the ball. They won't give the other team back, and it was
because the final score was like 18-2 or something.
Yeah, it was something like that. A very low scoring game, but the coach taught him you get the lead, and we'll just pass the ball around and play good defense, and not let them have the ball back.
Yeah, that was in Minnesota too, and I remember that because it was super low scoring. It was like 20-5. It was something super low, just unheard of, and in Minnesota. For high school anyways, they don't have a shot clock. So there's no, 40, 30, 25-second shot clock to work with. So you can sit there and just pass the ball as long as you want. You don't have to shoot it towards the rim and get it to bounce off the rim to reset it. All you have to do is, I think you have to keep moving because I don't think you can stand in one place for more than 5 seconds. I think it's a 5-second count. I could be wrong, but I'm not a basketball professor, but I think that's what it is. So in Minnesota, it's a little more lenient that way because you really can just sit on the lead if you wanted to.
Which, I feel like it doesn't prepare them a lot for college when all the rules change and you can't just, oh yeah, I got a 10-point lead and we're just not going to pass the ball. Right. I'll sit and dribble around the kids around and around and around. But at the same time, that's using what you have to an advantage. You don't have a shot clock, well, you can do it.
Yeah.
I don't know how far you get when teams when they could put up 10 points in all of a quarter of a minute. When you get to those teams, if it works, it works. But I can't imagine it works too well against them.
Right? Yeah, I don't know. That's tough to do. But I can't imagine a lot of kids would be happy with sitting there with a 18-point lead. Be like, no, come on, I want to score some points. But moving on, then a school that we we played quite often in sports, being from Pine City, East Central. Now East Central has kind of always been the butt of the jokes around sports because they've always not been too great. They've been, they've had some seasons where they're okay, but they're not. They're always. It was kind of the joke with Pine City, like, okay, we're facing them, it's a win. It's a win. Now all of a sudden, starting from last year, they've had a really good team. Last year they had a bunch of juniors and some good seniors. This year it's turned over to so far an undefeated record, and they're 8-0, averaging about 72 points per game. Only give up 45 points per game. They are ranked 6th.
That's you see that the gap widen a little bit there because they're playing, like you said, a little bit stiffer defenses. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're taking the same kind of shots and everything, but all it takes is 2-3 blocks, like you said, and that drops that whole points against you. Which, it's a good thing. I always like to see teams around us do really good right. Now that I'm out of high school. In high school, it was us or nothing, but that's what happens when you graduate.
Yeah, you start to, that pride kind of slips, your ego kind of drops down a little bit more, and you're like, oh, I'm glad to see they did well. But yeah, they're doing really well, and as I mentioned, it started from last year, really. Like I mentioned, they had a really good class. I think they only had about 2 or 3 seniors. Now they have like 8 seniors on their team, and when I first watched them play, I don't think they even had one guy who averaged more than double digits because they passed the ball around so much. Like I said, they had 7, 8 seniors, and each one of them gets their shot at points. They each score, and they're each 9, 10 points a game. So they're one of the teams that not only do they do a really good job of passing the ball around and getting everyone points, but they do a really good job of getting everybody in the game and making sure everybody's fresh. And that's the advantage you get with having a team that has a lot of veterans on it. They have that experience and that knowledge to where, they're passing it on and, just kind of seeps through everybody.
It'll be interesting to see next year. After you said they have about 8 seniors, they'll be gone next year, and to see how the next class goes. And with a lot of these other bigger schools and top 5 schools, we don't have this number of how many are seniors or how many seniors are starting. But some of these schools, I mean, you get a turnover class of seniors, and it's rough for the next few years while they build up those younger kids back up to what they were.
Yeah, it is sometimes, and we've seen that happen before with our sports being in high school. I mean, I think we personally seen it happen with football. Some of those were rough, but I seen it happen in wrestling. I think our junior year and senior year was really good, and then after our senior class graduated, it kind of took a dip for a year or two, but we were still competitive is the thing, and that's the thing is people think, oh, big senior class are leaving, it's not going to be competitive. No, they're still competitive. It's just taking a little time. These kids haven't played as much varsity, so we'll see.
They just don't have the experience that they needed to, and it's hard to give that when you have a big senior class. You can't, when you have all seniors there and they're playing, they're bigger, they're older and everything, so it's hard to justify giving little Timmy, the 9th grader, a spot or some time on varsity against Todd that's a 12th grader and can bench press 400 pounds.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, it's just, it comes with it. And it's every high school's faced it, or if they haven't, they will. So, but continuing on, Hinckley Finlayson, another team that kind of always been the butt of the joke. Always go there, we beat them. But this year, they're sneaky good. So they're 3-5. They're 79th in Class A. They're only averaging 55.5 points per game. They give up about 57.75 points per game. You might say, oh, no wonder why they're losing. But they will, I don't even know how to describe it because they are sneaky good. They will creep up on you, and they will make you fight for everything. Pine City just played them not too long ago, and the boys team is very good. They have been for the last couple of years. But this year, man, Hinckley gave them everything and more that they could handle. It was a 13-point victory in the end for Pine City, but, man, I was watching, I was like, man, the Jaguars in the playoffs in Class A, they are going to surprise some people.
Well, when you get those kind of sneaky teams, it's not much as of a kind of like a secret thing. It's they can score quickly and get turnovers quick and just put up the points, not when in like the last few minutes where it matters, and not that they can't, but they slowly build on those points, and they can do it in quick succession back and forth instead of a long, dominant, full game. They have, I'm guessing, like bursts is what you're looking at of points, and then they'll keep going and more points, and keep it close, and then keep it within striking distance at the end.
Yeah, that's a good point because that's kind of what it is. That's kind of what happened. They went on a couple of runs and they kept it really close because I think they scored 8 or 9 points before halftime to keep it at that close part. So I really think come playoff time, they're going to surprise a couple of people. Last year they did the same thing, and I said it, and it happened. So look for them in the playoffs. We'll have another one talking about that, I think, coming up when playoffs start around Minnesota. So that's Class Single A. Now we'll move to Class Double A, as we're about probably 15 minutes into this one already. In Double A, it's Minneapolis North. No big surprise there. They're 6-0 though, so that's kind of where the average you're gonna. It's not so true. 87.8 points per game, only allowing 34.5 points per game. Now you might be saying, "Oh wow, they're the best team in the state. No one's gonna beat them." Well, they haven't really played anyone that good. I mean, again, you see the margin of victory is over 50 points. They really haven't played anybody that competitive. Mind you, they still have yet to play Hopkins and De La Salle, two teams who are every year in the state tournament vying for that state championship. So, and not only that, I believe Hopkins is in 4A and De La Salle is in 3. So, they still have those two teams to play. Not that they can't win those games, but it's just we're going to see, the true kind of team come out when they play a competitive team. And, that's kind of a disadvantage for a team like that as well. They're so dominant in their, first however many games, and then all of a sudden they play a competitive team and they can't get anything going because they're used to less competitive teams.
They're not used to, like, the physicality of some teams, too. You get teams like the bottom-end teams, they probably don't man up nearly as good. They don't play nearly as physical. They don't get in your face.
Have less players.
Yeah, and they get tired out quick. They probably don't get many shots just up in your face blocked And you were telling me someone today that where is he from? The 6'5" guy?
Mora, 6'7".
6'7". He was who'd they play? It was
Pine City.
Yeah, they played us, and he just sometimes that's a big difference. That one player that you're not used to playing, now used to playing someone big, and they show up, and you're like, I can't even see over your head.
Yeah, and that's sometimes why I worry about teams like that. They're so dominant because they're not playing super competitive teams, and they hit I think they play Hopkins, someone else, I forgot who it was, and then De La Salle, and then I think they play Hopkins again. I could be wrong. I thought they played them twice. Could be wrong. But they two competitive teams to play yet, so we're really going to see that average change with those two games. Then in second place, it's another undefeated team at 8-0. It's Waseca. They're averaging 81 points per game and 49.5 points per game against them. That's more of a truer average. Again, they've had more competitive games, but it's still kind of teetering on the less competitive side. But I think that one's more true than Minneapolis North, as they played 8 games. Then in third, it's Caledonia. They're 8-1, 78.3 points per game, and they give up 56 points per game. Their lone loss was to Unalaska in the Class AA. So one loss, and again, sometimes that loss isn't necessarily a loss where it's like, oh man, they shouldn't be ranked. Sometimes it's just a freak loss. You have players down due to COVID, or that team goes on an insane run, and then you just can't catch back up.
Which happens a lot in basketball. You get on a team that's going on its runs, and you just can't stop them. I mean, you get one kid that just goes fire hot right away, and he drains like 3 threes. It's a 9-point swing if that's at the very end of the game or right before half, and you come out in a hole. It's hard to climb out of it, especially when they can keep the pedal on and at least keep scoring on you. It's hard to make up points.
Exactly, and that's sometimes just what it is. Moving on to number 4, it's Annandale. Again, they've only played 6 games. They're 6-0, though. They're 71.8 points per game, 44.5 points against them per game. That one's a little more true to me because it's not, you don't see the drastic, lean, 85 to 30. Instead, it's 71 to 44. Even though it's 6 games, it's a little more truer in my opinion. But again, maybe they just, that's just kind of what they want to do. They don't want to score too much. They don't need to. So they're just kind of sitting on the lead a little bit. And, hey, if it works, like you said. Then to number 5. Now, it's Mora. It's the Mustangs. They're 9-0. They were ranked number 4. Then they dropped, I don't know why, they dropped to number, I think it was 8 in the state. They dropped to number 8. And this was after beating Pine City, which was weird to me. So they dropped after being number 4. After beating Pine City, they dropped to 8, and now they're back at 5. I don't understand it completely. The QRF system is really tough, but, it is what it is.
It's all really weird because, how often do you drop the win? I know
Right.
It happens at college sometimes, and it's about the same kind of procedure. It's all weird and awkward, and it's like, well, they beat him, but they beat them, and they beat them, but
Right.
I still won. Why did I go down? Type thing.
Exactly, and I can't explain it. It's all mathematical science stuff. I couldn't get into it even if I wanted to because I wouldn't know what I'm talking about. But they average about 63 points per game. They give up about 44. Now, I will say this. They don't score as much because they really don't need to. Their defense is incredible. As I mentioned to you earlier, they have a guy who's 6'7". Against Pine City, they won 60 to 46. He had about 10, if not more, blocks. And not only that, he had well over 10 rebounds for that team. And that really was the difference to me because you give, 3-4 shots back that aren't blocked. That's 8 points right there. And then you get a couple rebounds. Well, there's a couple more shots, and you could tie it right up. That's all. You only need 14 points. You get 10 of those back from just blocks and rebounds, and then it's a completely different game. So we'll move on as we're kind of already deep into this with time. But so we'll stick with Class 2A, though. Moose Lake Will River, again, they're one of the ones where outside of football, they were never too competitive. Football was their main thing. Always, every year, it seemed to be that they were in state or winning state. But basketball, they're pretty darn good. So far, they're undefeated. And they score about 90 points per game. Now, again, since they're sticking with, playing in their conference and playing teams around them, maybe not the greatest of competitive teams. I'm not, I wasn't able to see how competitive Cloquet is. I'm sure they play, teams around that area. I mean, there's not a ton, but, still, 90 points per game for up there is still pretty darn good. And I got to imagine, that's not by just happenstance.
No, any team like outside of the cities that can put up 90 points consistently, it's pretty good, and I mean it's really good actually, and they're undefeated. And around here, I mean, there's not like you don't get the big high name schools that are always competitive, that are always in it, but you do get good teams, you get quality teams, and you get some sneaky teams every once in a while, like Hinckley, that can do their little thing and always make it close. But for them to have such a dominating win is
right.
It's nice to see it for the area. I mean, I wouldn't want to play them, but then again, I'm not good at basketball, so I don't want to play anybody.
Yeah, we'll have to see come tournament time. I mean, they're in, Class 2A, so they got to play more in Pine City or, maybe one, maybe both come playoff time. So we'll see. So right now they're number 9 in Class A. So obviously QRF is looking at them saying, hey, they're doing well, and they must play some semi-competitive teams. Otherwise, I don't think they'd be that high with just playing, non-competitive teams at all. So then we move on to Pine City, our alma mater. They are 40th right now in Class AA. 73 points per game. That is drastically dipped. They were at about 82 points per game to start the season, and then their first loss against East Central, that dipped it because they only scored 51 in that game, and then their loss against Mora when they only scored 46. So, but again, other than that, they're consistently scoring 75 points per game. But again, you got to beat the best teams, and if you can't, well, but again, playoff time is different. I want to give our school the benefit of the doubt, but, it's going to be tough this year. I will say that. It's going to be a heck of a state tournament.
Like you said, you want to root for your home team to win. Like, oh, they could pull it out. They just had some bad nights, and I mean, a couple of losses, like you said. I mean, they're kind of close, and a couple fast breaks here and there, and a couple turnovers changes it, but they're going to need a full dominant game against Mora, and who else did you say we lost to?
East Central.
And East
we
Central.
still have to play East Central again.
So you need more dominating play and to get past these guys, and if you're going to look to go in deep in the playoff run, you need those kind of long games, those quick turnarounds, those quick shots here and there, and to work some good defense. And
not to mention, Mora and Pine City are in the same section, too, so they're going to have to face Mora again, more than likely, if they want to make it deep in the playoffs. But, maybe luckily for them, they don't have to face East Central in the playoffs. But I will give them this. They were on a bit of a down part of their season where it was a 3-game stretch where they couldn't get their threes rolling. Their offense seemed to sputter. Their defense nothing just seemed to click. But then all of a sudden they came back against Paynesville, and it looked fantastic. It looked like they were right back where they were. It looked like the old Pine City. And then they played Mora. Not that they didn't play competitive against Mora, because they really did. It was a really competitive game. But they had a tree standing above all of them in a guy 6'7", Garrett Honstrom. So that definitely helped the Mustangs, because without him, I think it's a much closer game, if not the Dragons win, but here nor there.
And in the playoffs, you now know about him. I mean, you could see film on the guy, but it's different when you get to play against those people, and you could see, like, oh, this is what it looks like to be 5 foot and looking up at a 7.5 foot tree, and it's just, hopefully you can game plan for it now. Maybe it involves more the quick passing game to get around him. Hopefully he's not blazing fast with like a 440 speed where you get up and down the court, but hopefully he's kind of one of those slow, meandering kind of big guys. But
I wish that were the case. He's actually pretty quick, so...
Of course he is. Of course. No breaks anywhere.
He's a dangerous player, that's for sure. I think he did get about 10, 12 points for him, so not a shabby player by any means. But sticking in Class 2A, this is the final team, Rush City. They've kind of struggled here as of late. They started out undefeated. They're 5-2 on the season. They only score about 58 points per game. As I mentioned, they're ranked 62nd, so I think their true colors are kind of coming out. But they've faced some tough teams, I'll give them that. They actually lost to Hinkley Finlayson, mind you, and they're in a different class, so that's where I kind of say Hinkley Finlayson's sneaky, and then Bram beat him, but Bram is no slouch either. Bram is having a pretty darn good year. Now we'll go to the other side of the paper for Class 3A, and in that one, it's number 1, Minnehaha Academy. That might sound familiar to people who have been in Minnesota, or if you watch college basketball at all, men's college basketball specifically, because that's where Jalen Suggs went to high school, and he's been pretty darn good at Gonzaga University this year. We'll get into that a little later. But they're right now averaging about 80.7 points per game and give up only 51. And I gotta think, with the one loss in there, this is probably more of a competitive schedule.
Yeah, and what's their full record?
7-1.
7-1 with the one loss. You get closer to that true value, kind of at, I would say, a 10 is probably your good mid-season gauge. Well, obviously it's mid-season, but right. Your true gauge on what the average is going to be roughly about.
Now, I will say this. The team they lost to, you might have heard it, was IMG Academy. Yes, the one in Florida. Yes, they came to Minnesota and played Minnehaha Academy. That's their one loss, by the way. So, take that how you will, but one loss against probably one of the best schools in the nation, that's okay. And it wasn't a huge blowout loss. It was, I think, over a 20-point loss. But still, if you're IMG Academy, you're probably saying to yourselves, we need to make that a 60-point loss.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that they can invite these other teams and other schools from out of state to come play. I know we get some North Dakota teams that in hockey and different sports they play, so since they're so close, and some Wisconsin, but to get across the country schools to come and play, and I just think that's really cool, because these are people you don't know, you've never seen, you don't even know what their accents are different. It's just, I think it's really cool to see that kind of stuff. And like you said, that's one of the top schools in the country, so to have that going on and to only lose by 20 is only lose. I mean, no one wants to lose, but right. It's a good loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it teaches you a lot about your team and about yourself, especially when you're playing a school like that. So that's their lone loss on the season. Now to number 2, Totino Grace. They're 7-2, 77 points per game, 60.7 points per game is what they give up. 2 losses. It's been Class 3A is another competitive class. There are a ton of sections in there where you got 3 teams who could potentially make it to state, and it's all around this year. It's just going to be very good playoff sports, not just basketball, but hockey and wrestling. It's gonna be so good to watch. So stay tuned. As I mentioned, we'll keep giving you updates on the high school season here in Minnesota. We don't have time to do all 50 states, but coming in at number 3 is Alexandria. They're undefeated at 9-0, 70 points per game. They give up about 49.5, 50 points per game. So that's a pretty good team at 9-0. The spread isn't insane. It's 20 points for some people. That's like, oh, that's quite a bit. But again, you get on a run of 5-6, and it's already cut in half just about, and you only got to get 15 more, and you get on a run, or you get that other team in foul trouble, and man, those points come a little bit easier. So I'd say that they're going to be a team to look out for as well. And then Mankato West is 4th in that class. This one, they're scoring a little bit lower, 68.8 points per game and about 47.5, 48 points per game. Now, 8-1, again, a ton of Mankato teams out there, but they're a pretty competitive team. Now, this might be one more like Mora, where they can score more points. They just haven't needed to because they can rely on their defense.
And I think as we get into the bigger schools, you'll start seeing that more, where, well, at least more competitive, smaller spreads, I believe, is what we saw with the stats and everything. But, and like you said, you can sit on a lead with defense, and like you said, there's the shot clock doesn't exist, so you can't, you could really sit on it like we touched on earlier, but I think that's a part of it, and I don't think they're not like, oh, we had the lead, don't shoot, but I think they kind of take their foot off a little bit maybe in some of the things. Maybe by the end of the game they're playing a hard game, kind of gas. They're not shooting nonstop, like pounding teams into the ground. But you don't really know unless you actually get out there and play against them or play for them. You never
Watch them,
really know.
Yeah, so it is tough to kind of gauge sometimes, especially just based off stats. But again, sometimes you got to watch them, got to be there. But yeah, it's going to be competitive no matter what. And sometimes it has to do with the coach, whatever his philosophy is. If he's a guy who, let's get the lead, sit on it, well, then that's what you're going to do. You're not going to score a lot of points. But if his philosophy is shoot at will, well, then you're probably going to score more points. But then to round out Class AAA, South St. Paul is also undefeated. They're 9-0, scoring 87.2 points per game, and they give up about 64 points per game. So they're a pretty good team. Again, like I mentioned, going to be a super competitive class. Other than this next team we're about to mention, that's one of the local squads. I shouldn't say that because they are so competitive. It's just they've had a rough season. North Branch, they are 50th in Class AAA. They are 2-8. They score about 67, 68 points per game and give up about 73.5. Now, we kind of talked about this a little earlier. They've been in these games. Some of these games have been 3, 4, 5-point games against really good squads, but their losses have been kind of lopsided. So this is one of those teams where it's like, okay, if they're fully healthy, if they can get everybody back in the playoffs, they might make a push, but they need to have that good game. They need to be the squad that shows up and, has a 3-point loss against, one of the top 10 teams in the state.
You have those, and maybe they're, I haven't been able to see any of the games or anything like that. My only guess would be maybe they struggle against a certain type of opponent's offense, maybe. Maybe they struggle more in the paint. Maybe they're not bigger players. I haven't seen any of them.
Right.
And if you struggle in the paint, you can't get physical with them. What leads to losses, and it leads to some crushing losses when you face, like you said, bigger schools, just bigger, physical, more talented schools. It's hard to win when you can't seal off a third of the game for them.
Exactly. So sometimes it's tough. Sometimes it is that way. But sometimes those teams come into the playoffs and all of a sudden they're just beating everybody. And it's like, where did they come from? Well, kind of look at their squad and you might see. Now to the final class for boys basketball. That's Class 4A. We can't count that high. Number 1 is Champlin Park. They're 9-0, 70.5 points per game, and they allow 49.3 points per game. That's pretty true. 9-0, that's pretty true. They don't score a bunch, but again, maybe they don't need to. Again, like you said, it's the bigger schools, more competitive across the board. Same with this next team at number 2. It is Moundsview, 9-0 as well. Only score about 65 points per game and give up 55 points per game. Now, that's a little bit of a closer margin, but again, it's the bigger schools. Sometimes all you need is that 1-point victory, and it's still a win.
Yeah, and in high school, it's easier to have 3, 4, 5 standout players, and you might have 2 of them are playing great the game, and then 2 aren't, and maybe you'll have a game where all 5 are just on point, scoring points. You put up 100, but the other team has the same thing.
Right.
You're fighting the same people. You got 5 talented people, and weird, they keep it close.
Yeah, and sometimes it just comes down to that defense. Sometimes the saying is true: defense wins championships, and sometimes that's all it is: rebounds, blocks, steals, turnovers. Sometimes it's just defense. Then now to another undefeated team. 4 of the top 5 in this class are undefeated at 9-0. Eastview is. They are 3rd. They score about 73 points per game, and they give up about 53. Again, bigger schools, a lot more competitive, don't need to have that wider margin of victory. It seems a lot more even across the board with players. It's not like they have 1, they have 6. It's more like they have 4 or 5. They have 3 or 4, and it's super even. And then you get that. It always seems like there's one underclassman who's just out there, and then it's like, whoa, where did he come from? But it's like I said, top 4 of the 5 are undefeated, but it's not for no reason.
No, and to touch on the underclass thing, we'll touch on some kids in hockey who are underclassmen that are blowing me away because it's like, oh my God, I wish I was that good in 10th grade.
Yeah. We'll touch on that here after we get done with basketball. But then in fourth is Shakopee, as I mentioned, 9-0, 67 points per game. They allow 51. Same story. Sound like broken record, but bigger schools, more competitive. Maybe, because I talked about it with you. I said, well, I thought the bigger schools would score more, but you said not necessarily because, well, it's more competitive across the board.
I think, it's more competitive, and it's just, you got more people, more talent. You got more needles in the haystack, to say, because you just got more talent to find. And to piggyback on the scoring and the average and everything, I would say, I think in basketball, if you can hold a team under about 55 points, and you can score more than 55 and hold the other team under 55, I would say that's probably like the golden number. If you get below that and you're still winning games, it gets a bit rougher.
Yeah.
But if you can at least put up 60 and hold them to around 55, I would feel like that's the comfortable kind of average scoring there.
Yeah, we see a lot of teams with about, the 55, around that 53 mark, and some are at the 60. So it's, that kind of that 60 mark, it's kind of that magic number for both giving up and scoring. And this next team we're about to talk about, well, they're not doing either of those. That's Cambridge and Isani, the Blue Jackets. They're struggling this year. They had a really good team last year. They're tied for 56 in the state. They're 1-7 now. Give them the benefit of the doubt. It has been a super competitive schedule, but they're only scoring about 45 points per game, and they give up about 63. That kind of translates into wins and losses.
Which, that one's a pretty blatant stat there. But then again, like we talked about earlier, you wonder if was it a big turnover class last year for them? And maybe these younger guys aren't used to it. They didn't get the extra practice. They didn't get the extra experience of being in games and playing against these bigger schools. And like I said, it's needles in the haystack, and maybe they came up short this year. Maybe the following years will be good, since they're going to probably rotate younger people in, get them the experience, what they need to play. So maybe the upcoming years will be better for them.
Yeah, maybe. It's always interesting to see because, they had a pretty good player in Henry Abraham last year who went on to Eastern Illinois. And, it's just tough to see a team who is so good just have a tough year like this. But, again, who knows? They could be struggling with some COVID. Some of their players could be out because of that. But, it's tough. And you got to deal with it. Every team has to go through it at one point or another. And it's how you come through it at the end of it. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily matter how you play in the regular season. If you come to the playoffs ready to play, you're going to make some upsets, and you're going to push the pace.
I mean, we just look at the Browns this year.
Yeah.
No, I mean, we enjoyed that win.
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, I know there's more than enough people that probably discounted them. Or like Washington. Washington made it competitive against Tampa Bay. So you can get these low-win teams that can still come in and really make these good teams sweat bullets for it.
Right. Exactly. That's... couldn't put it better myself, honestly. But I think that's going to be the end of this video. We'll cut this one off, and then I think we'll go to a part 2, and we'll hit on the girls' basketball side of things here on the North Star Sports Show with ET&B.